The Bomber boys called it the sound of music. "1,500 horses, 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. A Lancaster gets ready for work. "7,377 Lancs were built during the Second World War, almost 4,000 of which were lost in action. Only 2 Lancasters are flying anywhere in the world these days. One in the UK, the other in Canada. Joe English knows the aircraft well. He was a Lancaster pilot. The last time he flew one, the world was at war.
It was like a 4-engine fighter. Very maneuverable for an aircraft that size, you know. I really enjoyed it. And I somehow learned to land the thing, too.
Joe and most of his original crew have come to Hamilton, Ontario for a flight in the Lanc. And best of all, Joe has brought his grandson.
I think it's great.
These 7 young men all descend from flight crews. Today they'll fly with the vets on a trip they will never forget.
Name? Hello, John. I don't want your first name, sweetheart.
They called themselves Baker Flight. And with blood, sweat, and yes, tears, they experienced some of the flight crew training their grandfathers went through when they were about the same age.
Move! Right! One!
Stepping through the looking glass was a shock for the 21st century recruits.
Because if you can't hold that up, then how are you supposed to fire it?
I don't know what I'd even call it. You look like a bloody scarecrow.
It's been rough. I'm living in hell.
But like their granddads did all those years ago, the boys toughed it out.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And we're going to do a pre-flight briefing before 4 Lancaster flights. We've got everybody.
The last time Joe English sat through a pre-flight briefing, he was going to war. It was April 1945. 29 times Joe and his crew had flown into battle. 29 times they had come home alive. A complete tour in Bomber Command was 30 operations, and crews were especially nervous on their final few trips.
Oh, it's scary when you get to 28, 29, 30. Yeah, you think, gee, you hear stories about guys getting it on their last second to the last mission, and that sort of thing, and it does happen.
13 days before the war would officially end in Europe, Joe and his crew were sent on one last sortie. Their mission? To join 359 other Lancasters, fly into the heart of Nazi Germany, and kill Adolf Hitler.
We only did about 2 daylight raids, but we were so used to the dark that was scary. And you could see the flak coming up, and you could see it sort of getting to your position. There wasn't a lot you could do to avoid the flak. We just hoped that you wouldn't get hit.
Allied intelligence had been told that Hitler and his high command were meeting at Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian Alps. Bomber Command decided that this was their chance to end the war.
As we came across the top of the mountain, the range to drop the bombs was just very short, and you almost had to be lined up and drop the bomb the moment you hit the crest of the mountain.
The bombers delivered their loads on time and on target. But once again, the fates intervened. Hitler had canceled the meeting and stayed in Berlin. Joe and his crew returned safely to their base in England. Operation 30 was in the books. They had completed their tour. They had beaten the odds. They had survived.
To look back, it just seems like a dream that happened a long time ago.
60 years after that final trip, Joe and his crew are about to do what they thought they would never do again. Go flying in a lake.
Oh, he's just living it up. He's 17 again, and he's just loving every second of this, you can tell.
We're not heroes exactly. We didn't do anything worthy of getting a DFM or DFC. We just did what we were told to do, you know. And we didn't feel heroic at all.
Majority of Canadians fulfilled their obligation. I knew lots of them. They were all good guys. And it had to be done.
That was amazing. Awesome. Oh, it was just great. It was amazing. Such a powerful machine. I didn't think it'd be that loud.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. This is my buddy here.
For the boys of Baker Flight, this has been a once-in-a-lifetime experience. A time to capture. A time to remember.
I-10! Chun!
And the grandfathers hope they do. 55,000 young men died in Bomber Command's war. Many in a Lancaster, just like this. Pearson Airport, Toronto, Canada. The generations have assembled for a trip to Europe. Joe has invited his good friend, Len Bawtry, along. Len flew the Lucky H when Joe came home to get married. For the vets, the trip will be a time of friendship and also a time of closure. About 1,000 Second World War veterans die each week, and soon after the journey, a member of this crew will pass away.
Yeah, I haven't been there since I left way back in '46. So I'm a little excited to go back and see if I can visit some old friends and see some old spots.
It's not just the grandfathers who are looking forward to the pilgrimage. John Lowe, the grandson of a dam buster, wants to learn more about his granddad's secret mission. And Robin Hillman hopes to find the crash site where his grandmother's brother died. But no one is more excited than Harvey Gottfried. At 87, he's the oldest member of the crew and keen to find his friend, Mike Chalk. Mike was the wireless operator air gunner on their Lancaster. He's now battling Alzheimer's. No member of the crew has spoken to Mike since the war, and they're worried about the extent of his illness. And their concern is etched with guilt. Their cherished friend has grown old, alone. There is an unshakable bond between the men who go into battle together. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, wrote Shakespeare. Like most veterans, the Joe English crew are modest about their time at war. They served their country. They fought beside friends.
Ours was an exceptional crew, and because we all liked each other. If that happened, if we gelled like that, and that's what did happen, then you work together. You're looking after each other.
What'd they do to you?
He's gonna get scared.
During the war, Bomber Command maintained 35 operational bases, in central and eastern England. The most well-known, RAF Scampton. 60 Lancs flew from here, including Joe's aircraft, the Lucky H. Scampton was run like a city at war. 4,000 servicemen, a bus service, and best of all, hot water. Unlike their first English posting, a muddy field called Kelstern.
At Kelstern, none of us had had a shower for a couple of weeks, I think, and Harv don't remember this real good, Harv Gottfried, but I remember him tying his underwear up to his bed at night so they wouldn't crawl away, he said, because there was no hot water, nothing there. Scampton had warm, running water.
3 Victoria Crosses were won by Scampton crews, including Guy Gibson's medal, the leader of the dam busters.
Wing Commander Guy Gibson, he's only about 23 or 24 years old, but what a dynamite guy, you know, a dynamo, running the whole station as a wing commander. They were all there on the mantelpiece, the pictures of the unit that had done the dam buster squadron. We were very aware of the fact that we were in pretty high company.
The dam busters were an elite squadron who attacked German hydroelectric dams in 1943. Audacious and top secret, the raid offered little chance of survival. All the crews had volunteered. John Lowe's grandfather was a bomb aimer on the operation.
Even before they got to the dam, they were hit by enemy fire, and one of the engines was slightly damaged, and they started going out of control, and my grandpa knew that he had to release it, so he released it, and he was able to knock out the power station, which cut all the power, so all the power in the whole area was out.
After being shot down, John Fraser was captured and finished the war as a POW.
These aren't just pages in a history book. These people had families, they had friends, they had goals in life, they had dreams, and they put them all aside so that I could be here today.
There's no more flying at RAF Scampton these days. Like the vets themselves, this once proud airfield has grown old.
So you and Joe were right next to each other then?
Oh yeah, when we took off.
So you saw everything then?
Well, when we took off, I had to handle the throttles, you see, with Joe to take off.
I was the mid-upper gunner, and I saw all of Western Europe with the best seat in the house.
I used to come up and stand up between these two when we land.
The boys at Baker Flight are beginning to see their grandfathers differently. Not as old men with failing bodies, but as men of courage and strength who volunteered to fly aircraft through the dark German skies. From Scampton, the crew heads south towards the English coast, where Harvey's friend, Mike Chalk, lives. But first, a member of Baker Flight has a duty to perform. Robin Hillman has long wanted to pay his respects at the site of his ancestor's death.
I'm 23, the same age as he was when he died, and I know I've got lots of life left to live. It's hard to imagine that being cut so short.
William Gavin Campbell and his entire crew were killed when their Lancaster crashed just days before the end of the war. 60 years after that terrible day, it is something the family still grieves.
It was quite a devastating thing for our family when he died, since the war was pretty much over. He died during the closing days of it. This stone was erected in 1999 by the Sandon and District Royal British Legion in memory of the crew of a Lancaster Bomber, which crashed nearby on 30th of April, 1945. My great-uncle, Flight Lieutenant William Gavin Campbell, Flight Sergeant J.H.K., Warrant Officer, Class 2, T.D. Lawley. For every air crewman that made it back alive to tell their story, there were quite a few more who didn't, and may have been forgotten if it weren't for these kinds of memorials. so that we remember their story. I think it's important that we don't forget these people who, I wouldn't say died needlessly, but tragically.
In a small town on the edge of the sea lives a man who means a great deal to the Joe English crew. This is Brighton, the home of Mike Chalk. Like many veterans, the crew lost track of each other after the war. Only recently did Joe, using the internet, track his friends down. Mike was the hardest of all to find.
I haven't seen him since when we left Scampton after the supply dropping. Oh, 60 years, isn't it? Well, Joe was only 19, isn't it? Became men very quickly. He had to.
As years shrink to moments and the long-awaited reunion looms, the old men worry. Will Mike remember?
Mike was quite a bit of the glue that held us together. Haven't seen him, well, for 60 years now, so I'm really looking forward to seeing him today. Yeah.
I remember the first time I met Mike, I found out he was in the RAF, and he met another wireless operator, and the wireless operator says, have you got crewed up yet? And Mike says, yeah. He says, I guess I'm going to be flying with a bunch of bloody Canadians. And he pointed at me. And Mike and I were real good friends.
As we are now going to see him, I just hope he has got, you know, an ability to recall some of the old times, but we don't know.
The average Englishman is a fairly dignified fellow, and especially Mike, quite a quiet guy. We found out later on that he had a terrific sense of humor, and we just had a ball with Mike. Here we go.
You come in. Good morning. I'm David.
Mike,
oh, you're all right.
Rascal.
Oh, God.
Hello. Good to see you.
Oh, God, you have changed the booth.
Oh, thank you. That's the trouble.
Everybody don't stand up.
Oh, yeah.
Who's this great fellow? How you doing, Mike?
You look a bit older, John.
You got a little fatter in the middle, you know.
Don't think I'm being rude, but I can't stand up very long. My old legs are not working very well. I've got 68. And another one. Here we go. That's my wife. Where we got now. I'm about to take you down to our local pub, which I think you will enjoy. The Jew Drop In.
You knew a lot of those old music hall songs, and you must remember them today. We got to have them sing one at least, eh? What do you think?
Guinness and wafts, pounds and pence. Wartime pubs were a special place for flight crews. On many nights, hours before the first beer was drawn, men had been in the air fighting for their lives. The fortunate came home to tell stories of near misses and snafus, their terror tucked away behind laughter and song.
Oh, we haven't seen the Führer for a hell of a time. He must have been blown up with the bomb. He came to France to see what we were doing. The RAF will be bloody ruined. He's the leader of a bomb gang, and he ain't no cutter the mine.
Well done.
But as the long day unfolds, the men tire, the memories darken.
When the bombs dropped down there, you could see them, the flames that would come up from them.
Big rectangular fire. Even from 20,000 feet, it looked a considerable strip of fire, didn't it?
I would look down there and see all that fire. I've got to admit, I was glad to get back behind my curtain and forget about that.
I can imagine that it could have been very bad for whoever, civilians, women and children.
No, I never thought of the people down there.
It was just a job.
It was just a job.
I don't think we ever went to a target where we didn't have a target to bomb. It was a ball bearing factory or a gasoline storage or something. we knew that a lot of the civilians did also get killed from our bombing.
And one other thing you've got to remember, we were fighting a total war.
That's what I was
Remember? When you're fighting a total war, you don't want to kill off children, and I agree. But if they're there in an area where we're going to drop bombs on, they shouldn't have been there.
The one thing you don't want to do is come second in a war. You've got to win regardless of what you have to do. Today, everybody has counseling for everything. The only counseling I got was from Mike over the beer table. He counseled me, and I counseled him. And that's about all the counseling we had, wasn't it, Mike?
Well done, Burke. Thank you. No, you were right to me. Any photographs, I would love to have them.
Oh, yeah.
Please.
We'll try and keep you.
Yes, thank you.
Mike.
Lovely to see you. Bless you.
It's good to see you, Mike. Gosh, I didn't think I'd ever see you again.
No, thank you so much. Bless you. I must
Remember
go.
the good old days. Don't look at those bad ones, just the good ones.
You take care.
I didn't find you. 59 years.
Oh, never mind. We found nothing.
Still
There you
amazing.
are.
Yeah,
Thank
glad to
you.
see
Bless
you.
you. Thank you, Harvey.
One more hug. I need one too.
Bless you, Harvey.
Thank you very much, Mike.
My good friend. Bless you.
You've been great.
Yeah.
Real nice people.
Oh, just great. It was wonderful. Even better than I thought.
In 1944, when Joe and his crew arrived in Britain, they were keen to get into action. But months of instruction still lay ahead. Operational training, heavy conversion training, combat training. It took almost another year before aircrew flew on their first wartime operation. And after all that training, half the bomber crews went missing before their 10th trip. Joe Moreau was one of those lost boys. The mid-upper gunner was killed on his 9th. He was the friend Joe English never met. Joe Moreau was the brother of Claire, the girl Joe English was in love with and would later marry. The two young bomber boys were posted only a few miles apart and made plans to meet, but never did.
He was in training as an air gunner, and I was on the pilot stream. And we never did get together, you know. You think, oh, your leave will coincide sooner or later, but I never met him. But I feel like I have, because I know so much about him, you know.
Joe Moreau and his crew died near the Belgian town of Meeuwin on the night of the 22nd of June, 1944. Hit by flak, their aircraft was coming down in flames towards the sleeping town. Seconds before impact, the Lancaster appeared to deliberately bank towards a nearby forest, hitting a tree and cartwheeling across this field. 60 years later, the villagers still remember that terrible night.
Hier lag het grootste stuk van het vliegtuig en daar zat ook een lijk in. En hier hebben we, die morgen zijn we ook naartoe gaan kijken. En hier hebben we veel bezienswaardigheden gezien. En zo naar die kant, daar hebben we nog een lijk ontdekt. Dat lag in het korenveld, een 100 meter van elkaar. Hier in dat korenveld is het laatste lijk gevonden, 3 weken nadat het vliegtuig was gevallen. Het was al in staat van ontbinding.
The villagers recovered the crew's remains and washed the bodies, and then secretly, in defiance of German rules, buried the dead Canadians in the local graveyard. Across most of Europe, remembering men like Joe Moreau is more than a yearly obligation. And on this morning, both generations of bomber boys are on their way to pay respect to the fallen.
Do you have any pictures? Yeah, I have not with me. No. We got all kinds of pictures. Yeah, yeah. And actually, Joe looked a certain amount like you. He wasn't as tall as you. He'd be a little between you and me, somewhere in there.
They have come to the Adigum War Cemetery near Ghent in Belgium, where Joe Moreau's body was moved after the war. For Joe English, this will be the day he'll finally find the friend that he never knew. And for Matthew and the rest of Baker Flight, a day to count their blessings. 1,145 men lie at Adigum. 848 are Canadians. Men who died at Nijmegen and Arnhem, in the German skies or the Belgian fields. Men who fought a war they did not want. Men who knew valor as a daily virtue.
It seems like on every gravestone there's like some of them there's writing. Is that from the families?
Either that or just the War Graves Committee put them on, but the family would have a say in what was put on.
Like this guy in 19.
Yeah, lots of them 19.
It's pretty close to art.
19 years old, 22 years old.
Young kids.
Yeah.
There's just so many graves here, and there's so many people who just, their lives are over in seconds. I mean, it's really scary.
Well, it's something that we should always remember. I think I've got a cousin here somewhere, whether here or another graveyard, that was just about your age when he was killed. It's sad to see the graveyards over there with so many 19-year-olds in it, 20-year-olds, practically wiped out a generation. I don't think Canadians realize at all, really, what it was.
We fought a war to end the wars. That's what we thought we were doing. And the sacrifice that these people made should always be kept in mind.
I think these ones are all Canadian, aren't they?
I wonder how many graves are here.
I don't know. Too many, I'll tell you that.
If something happened to my grandfather, then, he would be here and I wouldn't even be alive. Really kind of blows your mind to come here and see everybody around the same age when he was serving that have died.
Jeez. It was such a shock, because it could have been us so easily, and their crew only lasted, I think about 9 or 10 trips, and boom, they were gone.
In life, loved and honoured, in death, remembered, may he rest in peace.
My darling son, blow softly, wind, over his dear young head. Whisper our love.
In silence we remember Mother and Dad.
In my heart, your memory kept. I smile with the world, but never forget. Loving wife, Christine. Sergeant Joe Miro, Air Gunner, Royal Canadian Air Force, June 22nd, 1944.
Days before the end of the war, the Joe English crew took part in a miracle. Operation Manna was the code name given to Allied mercy flights, which dropped food into starving Dutch cities. Hans Underwater was a boy here in Rotterdam when the Lancasters came.
And that's where the first food was dropped on the 29th of April, 1945. And you have no idea what it meant to people. It meant food, but it also meant liberation. It meant that the war would be over soon. Typhoons, as you knew,
Joe flew the very first aircraft over Rotterdam.
Typhoons, they were so afraid.
It was the best bombing we did in the war, you know. It was a wonderful thing. And we didn't realize the significance of it at the time. But since that, you know, 60 years later, we know. And every Dutch person I ever met that finds out that I was on Manna drop, oh, God, it's like idolatry.
The winter of 1944-45 was a time of horror for the Dutch. Families made tulip stew and drank animal blood. Bodies lay in the streets as 22,000 people died of starvation. It was the hunger winter.
The Germans believed that if the Dutch would see their children die, they would cave in and behave according to German rules. I think it's the essence of, let's say, government terrorism, that by making sure that the weak ones die first, the stronger ones will be more careful before they do something.
60 years later, Alberta, Canada. Ron and Marie Grunveld are retired farmers who came to Canada from Holland after the war. In 1945, Ron was in the Dutch underground, being hunted by the Gestapo, and Marie, a hungry teenager.
People were dying left and right. Even walking on the street, they'd drop down and died in the gutters. It was just terrible.
In the spring, the Allies made a deal with the Germans to allow food drops. The crews would fly low, and they would fly slow, trusting the Germans to hold their fire.
Well, the first thing I saw was right on the coast, and it was German pillboxes, you call it, right on the coast, and they were manned. There was definitely men there, and they were looking up at us, but we had been told there was a truce signed, and with our guns, they had put a plastic cap over each gun. And we were told that if those plastic caps were broke, the Germans better damn well have fired first.
To think that we were actually doing some good instead of bombing these people and so on, we were going to actually feed them some sustenance. You could see them off on the side all the time, yeah. Quite a few of them, as a matter of fact, lined up. And on top of that, we knew that the war was over, or just about over, you know. It had to be, surely it had to be.
One moment you are shivering, and then one moment you are, oh, wow, there's food. You know, it is hard to explain that, because you are in zone for a long time, and all of a sudden, there is food.
Allied aircraft flew 5,000 operations in 10 days, bringing 12,000 tons of food to starving Holland. The crews called them spam and jam flights. The Dutch called them Manna, food from heaven.
I appreciate the gratitude and the warm feelings of my parents. And I agree that these men, as long as they are alive, deserve the gratitude and the honor and the respect we give them, because they saved my nation.
A battery? You always had with the Germans, you had 4 guns.
In our fast food world, the importance of Operation Manna has mostly been forgotten. But in the Grunwald home, there's a legacy to the courage of the men who flew those life-saving missions. A portrait of Ron and Marie's growing family. The world the veterans came home to after the war was much different than the one they had left behind. It was a time of hope, a time of forgetting. Returning warriors were told to pick up their lives and get back to work. And the Joe English crew did just that. Burke Thomas went home to Alberta and ranched. Ernie Courteau became a tradesman and worked in the Ontario pulp mills. Jack Munday remained in England, becoming an industrial designer. Harvey Gottfried moved to Florida, where he bought land, which made him a millionaire. And Joe went to university and became an architect. Like most Second World War veterans, the crew of the Lucky H simply got on with life. And as the old well know, life passes quickly. In a small farming town, 60 years after the end of the Second World War, a congregation gathers to say farewell and thank you to a bomber boy who lived a full and fruitful life. Harvey Gottfried was 87 when he passed away.
In one sense, I enjoyed the service and enjoyed the discipline, so to speak. And of course, it's right at a time when I felt I had a real job to do. I had a real job to do, and I was pleased that I was able to do it.
The thing that he told me that I know he did enjoy was every time when they would go back home, he would go up behind the captain and he would stand there just because he told me he wanted to make sure that he did a good job and got him home okay. So I know that he did enjoy doing that.
He expected us to be good, and that's the way it was. You know, we were as good as him. We tried to be as up to his standard.
I always knew that Harv was there. He was as far away as that telephone. And quite often we'd just pick it up and phone him, and he was right there. And it really bothers me a bit today to think that he's not there. I can't pick up the phone and talk to him. I just liked him. He was a good guy.
Whatever we did in the aircraft, he only gave me a bad time if I was kind of straying off course or something like that, or I missed my altitude by a couple hundred feet. He wanted me to be precise because he was precise.
Remembrance Day. Joe English salutes the passing of another year. At 81, Joe lives by himself and is in good health. But recently he has lost not just Harvey, but also Claire, his wartime sweetheart and wife of 59 years. For Joe, like all veterans, November 11th is a time of restless memories.
There's several people that I remember that started our squadron, and they would get, well, one fellow called a flying officer, Nightingale was his name. And he came on our squadron. He was a very small, little, timid fellow, and he had his crew, and he was ready to go fight the war. He lasted 5 trips, and that's the last we ever heard of him.
Harry Schmuck was a bomber boy who did come home. A mid-upper gunner on a Halifax, Harry became a priest after the war.
It's always confusing to go to, say, the cenotaph on November the 11th, because you have all these mixed emotions, you know. You look around the crowd, and some of them are looking at their watch, you know, and saying, you know, how much longer is he going to go on, and when are we going to get out of here? And then I think about all the cemeteries that I have seen personally in Germany, in Holland, in Belgium, in France, the literally thousands of gravestones that I have seen. And I think to myself, I wonder how many of these people are grateful for the supreme sacrifice that those men made.
If we don't remember them, then, I mean, that's the whole point of them going off to war, is to serve their country and to die with honor. So we must honor them. We really must.
Ontario, Canada. The bomber boys have gone home. Harvey Gottfried was just one of 200,000 young men who passed through camps like this on their way to war. Each came for their own reasons. Each met their own fate.
They're gonna be gone soon, and there's gonna be no stories. And, you know, I think it would just fade away if nobody was interested in what they were doing.
Their ultimate goal was freedom. They went to war to save us, and who knows if my grandfather wouldn't have come back. I can't forget that I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him serving his country and doing his part.
Remembrance Day at a neighborhood skateboard park. Most of these skater boys know little of the war Joe English fought. Generations pass, stories are lost. But for Joe's grandson, Matthew, his time in Baker Flight has given him something he will never forget. The knowledge that the boys who went to war were just like him.
Just having a veteran as a grandfather and being able to hear all these just unbelievable stories, it adds to just this great knowledge that I'll be able to pass on to my children and my grandchildren.
The Second World War lasted just over 2,000 days. It cost 60 million lives, as men and women of free will came together to defeat what Churchill called the stain of pestilence and the shadow of darkness. Those who fought the Allied cause were much like the bomber boys of the Joe English crew, serving their country, grieving their friends, and fighting for young people like Matthew, so that he could skateboard in the warm autumn sunshine and slip effortlessly away when his day was done.